All right, everybody, lecture number 7, the Roman Empire. Hey, we're all a little Roman, yo. Yes, just when you thought you had escaped Mrs. Malloy's cheesy mantra, there she goes again with the yo. Right, so we've been discussing the Roman Republic and how they began expanding into an empire. See, although the early Romans developed a republic that was, by nature, extremely democratic, their ever-expanding empire was becoming harder and harder to maintain or control. Eventually, the Roman Republic is going to turn into a dictator-ruled empire as it continued to expand. All right, so how did their republic collapse? Well, this new political system is going to emerge in Rome. There were a lot of changes that were weakening the republic. The republic weakened especially as unhappiness among lower classes in society continued to build. There was a huge gap between the rich and poor, and it made those have-nots feel increasingly as though they had no say in government. Many of the poorest citizens fought in the Roman army, for instance, but they had little to show for their efforts. Additionally, about 1/3 of the Roman population was made up of slaves who weren't allowed any political say or participation. Many people became advocates for the poor, and they tried to speak out against poverty. They tried to help by making government reforms, etc. And two of those outspoken critics versus poverty were two brothers, one by the name of Tiberius Gracchus and Gaius Gracchus. Oh, don't worry about spelling. Write it out phonetically. It's okay. So Tiberius and Gaius, these were two brothers, and they became really, really popular for their support of poor people. Yet their support for poor people made some of the richest members of Roman society fairly upset and threatened. And unfortunately, both brothers died violent deaths, and I think it's safe to say that they were probably murdered by people who wished to shut them up. Anyway, following their deaths, there was a period of civil war in the Roman Republic. All right, another problem facing the Republic was that the military was growing out of control. Military leaders found it more and more difficult to keep their soldiers in check as the empire continued to expand. Julius Caesar eventually is going to seize control of the Roman Republic. Caesar and two other men are going to form something called a triumvirate, which is a group of 3 rulers. They ruled for 10 years. Julius Caesar and one of the other rulers of the triumvirate, named Pompey, they began competing with each other for influence and power. They each had their individual armies that ended up fighting each other, and Caesar was going to win, and he will gain support of the Roman Republic and its population. He then is going to be appointed as dictator for life in 44 BC. So, although Caesar was a dictator who ruled with absolute control, he did put forth many reforms to keep people happy, like making some people Roman citizens who previously hadn't been given citizenship. He created public building projects, created new jobs, and started colonies where people who didn't own any property could suddenly own land. So, if you give people things, they're going to be happy. Unfortunately for Caesar, some of his political rivals and even some of his closest allies in government, one day they lured him into the Senate building and then they stabbed him to death, along with one of his closest friends, Marcus Brutus. Supposedly, at least according to Shakespeare, Caesar's last words were, "Et tu, Bruti?" Forgive my pronunciation, folks. I've never taken Latin, okay? Anyway, that supposedly means, "And you, Brutus?" Anyway, have you ever heard the word brute? Do you know what it means? As in, hey, that Mrs. Malloy is such a brute for giving us so much darn homework. A brute is defined as a real beast of a person. So I think you can now figure out the origins of brute, as well as any subsequent cultural references you now get. All right, anyway, so Julius Caesar was murdered, and of course another civil war broke out. Eventually, 3 of Caesar's biggest supporters are going to band together to form another triumvirate. These 3 people were Caesar's grandnephew or adopted son, named Octavian, Mark Antony, and Lepidus. They ruled for 10 years together. And of course, they all became jealous rivals and started fighting. For instance, Mark Antony hooked up with Egyptian Queen Cleopatra, causing all sorts of fighting. And then Octavian started to fight against Mark Antony's army and Cleopatra's army, and they lost. So Cleopatra and Mark Antony committed suicide, but that's another story. Octavian is then going to become the dictator of Rome. In fact, he's going to begin calling himself Augustus, or Exalted One. So Augustus Caesar will become one of the most well-known leaders ever in one of the most powerful empires ever. In fact, the word emperor is coined from a title he took for himself called imperator. Excuse my pronunciation there. Imperator. And later in history, the word Caesar will be transformed into other languages and represent emperor, like Tsar in Russia and Kaiser in Germany. Interesting, huh? And all because of Augustus Caesar. Wow. Right, so Augustus Caesar is really credited with helping the Roman Empire reach its peak around 27 BC. Even after his death, the Roman Empire is going to dominate the world until AD 180. So for 207 years, the Roman Empire had it all. Prestige, territory, peace, harmony. In fact, it was such a great point in history that it was called Pax Romana, meaning Roman peace. Pax Romana is considered a golden age in history, and this is so important to remember for your Regents exam because during Pax Romana, some of the most significant Roman art and architecture will be produced. And the cultural achievements made during this period were so incredibly significant that, hey, we're still looking at them even today. During the period of Pax Romana, Rome had an efficient government. They had beautiful or splendid public building projects. They had an adequate food supply, a civil service system, adequate tax collection, a postal system, and an immense amount of trade with their complex trading network. In fact, the saying, quote, "all roads lead to Rome," really was true, in that the center of world trade and culture at that time was centered in Rome. See, Rome, for many people, especially during the Pax Romana, came to symbolize the best of everything: values, culture, strength, discipline. All of these values came to be known by the term gravitas. After Augustus Caesar died in AD 14, there were many other emperors, some good and some not so good. The thing is that Pax Romana continued until AD 180. The Romans are going to continue to practice their belief in Roman gods and goddesses, whom they borrowed from the Greeks, and some not, but anyway. They had government-provided entertainment in the form of gladiator battles and races in the Colosseum. Eventually, a new belief system, though, is going to dominate and emerge and take hold in the Roman Empire, something called Christianity. But more on that later. Thanks for listening, everyone. Bye.